Is Bitcoin a Ponzi scheme? A criticism that you see from a lot of Bitcoin critics. And you see quite some uneducated responses to that. And so maybe if you have been wondering if Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme and you're trying to figure out the actual kind of fundamentals, this is the right video for you. Have a lot of fun. Hey and welcome to today's video. My name is Julian. On my channel, it's all about making you crypto fit. I discuss the beautiful world of blockchain cryptocurrencies. Today, we're gonna go into a bit of a serious, and you will see actually some more videos of that. For example, is Bitcoin polluting the environment? And a couple of others when it comes to banning, regulation. I see these kind of things thrown around either by people who are trying to be critical, who are either just hating, or who are actually uneducated. And yeah, the funny thing to that is that most people, even though they may be Bitcoin fans, struggle in responding. And because they struggle in responding, their answers actually most of the time get quite bad. And so what I'm trying to do in this video, relatively short, kind of make you understand from a first principle perspective on why Bitcoin may or may not be a Ponzi scheme and kind of work this out in fundamental details. Maybe as a quick exercise, if you want to, pause the video and or let me know in the comments why Bitcoin is or is not a Ponzi scheme, and try to phrase it as rational and as understanding as possible. I have a screen share here. Let's get going. When people talk about Bitcoin being a Ponzi scheme, most of the time it either happens because people are just trying to hate on Bitcoin, so they're just trying to criticize it. And this is actually a relatively difficult answer for most people to give, right? Why is it not a Ponzi scheme? But obviously others, they're just ignorant, they don't want to look at the facts, or they are just incompetent, they don't know how to do it. And this, at the end though, it shows to be quite tricky for most people to respond. Most of the time, right, there's this kind of pyramid of how to respond to criticism. And there are various levels, and I've just kind of highlighted 5 of those. The most common, I can actually, sorry, Wallace, I'm just gonna pick this out here. Most of them are gonna go for this very first one, and it's actually a bit of a, that you're giving me this. It's not a clear ad hominem attack, but ad hominem means that you go against the person. And so you have someone who says Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, and then someone might say, oh, this is just an idiot, or what a total douche, or okay, boomer, or have fun staying poor. So you just kind of go against the person without any reasoning. The problem is that there's no real explanation to this, right? So just because someone says it's a Ponzi scheme, if you just go against that person, yeah, it might be super effective. And actually a lot of politicians, a lot of the media, a lot of the kind of, I don't know, social media, Twitter, Reddit kind of style does these ad hominem attacks. The problem though is that the real decision makers, people who really kind of move the needle, they don't fall for that crap. Right? They actually want to have good reasoning. And so if we as a community never grow up from getting rid of this ad hominem attacks, we are going to be struggling. And you see this left and right, right? You see this, for example, when Peter Schiff talks about Bitcoin, it's mostly ad hominem attacks that people do. Or when Elon Musk goes, it's mostly ad hominem attacks. Totally useless, and it's not going to get us anywhere. Other than, yeah, you might be a bit of the kind of a typical social media hating kind of style. That's the first kind of concept. Totally useless. I'm not gonna go with that. The next one, and that's very typical, is that you do something called like a framework change. And what you do is a very effective kind of debate mechanism or argument kind of mechanism, or even a negotiation mechanism. And basically what you do here is when someone says this, you kind of make fun of the other person. You make fun of the statements. You don't really attack that person, but you kind of make fun of him. You could put Wallace's comment into this a bit, where you could say, it is actually almost more of a frame change. It is kind of more of that than anything else. and you go by moral kind of concepts, and you're like, yeah, but Bitcoin could actually be a Ponzi scheme, or you need to support this, or you shouldn't be saying this, or you go by these typical kind of racism things that are not real racism, right? So you kind of put this immediately into this corner. And you see this a lot when people try to argue with facts. It's very, very, very efficient to go this route and kind of talk about morals and what's right. So that works super well. Another one is, I call it the washing machine principle. And basically what you do here is when someone says Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, then you counter throw and you say, yeah, but what about gold? Right? So that is kind of a next level, but you just throw another argument against it. And you see this a lot on Twitter. When someone criticizes a coin, instead of actually going against the criticism, people just throw something against it, right? So when Bitcoin maxis criticize Ethereum, and then Ethereum just jumps back and says, yeah, but what about this and this? That's just, it's completely useless. And to be honest, I mean, in a lot of relationships, that's what's happening, right? Why didn't you take out the trash? Why are you always late? Why are you not doing this, right? I mean, this is such a low-level, destructive way of actually attacking something. Another one is, and that's now we're getting a bit more constructive, is someone says Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, and now you come and bring up a totally new argument that doesn't really approach this. For example, you bring up the argument where you're like, but you know what? How can Bitcoin be a Ponzi scheme if El Salvador has just been integrating it as a cryptocurrency? As a local fiat currency. So what you're doing is, first of all, you actually use authority, which is never a good way to argue, because the same authority might not be recognized by the other person, plus it's a very, very weak way to argue. But you bring up another argument. So, and you see this, you see this in the YouTube comments, you see this on Twitter, and it's still quite constructive, but at the end, it doesn't take you anywhere, because you're not really explaining on why is Bitcoin not a Ponzi scheme. At the end, the only thing you can do is you need to think from first principles. And that means you really need to dig apart the reason on why Bitcoin is not a Ponzi scheme. And you need to explain it, not emotionally, with data and facts, and very fundamentally. Because if you can do it, and I just want to warn you, obviously there's a lot of people, right? Probably like 80%, who are not interested in the facts, right? They have an opinion and they just look for things that strengthens their opinion. They don't try to look for facts and then build their opinion. So you just have to understand that. But, and now is the key thing, the key decision makers, people that really matter, they don't care about this stuff here, right? They are so used to this, they just don't care. They really need this. And you will see Elon Musk, great decision makers, Ray Dalio, all of them. They are thinking from first principles. And that's what's so important. And that's what I'm trying to do here for you right now. So let's kind of do this. Let's first ask ourselves, what is value? Because that's what it comes down to. Okay, price, and that's basically the Bitcoin price, is simply a function of supply and demand. Very simple. We know this, right? So the more something happens, right, and the less the demand of something, the lower the price. Over time, in the between, you will have a lot of emotional volatility. But over time, the price will always go to the value. Always. Here are a couple of important things. Value is always subjective. There is no intrinsic value. So if someone, and this is again, a lot of times when people talk about like from authority, they say, oh, a price will always go to its inherent value. That concept doesn't exist. There is no intrinsic value. That concept doesn't exist, right? This is absolute bullshit. Value is always subjective. Always. So, what is the function for value of something? Value is the utility of something. So the more utility, the better. Times the number of people that need that that utility, the more the better. And how rare that thing is, right? So if we look at what a Ponzi scheme is, and that's actually the question here, can you explain what a Ponzi scheme is? I had to actually use first principles, otherwise I can't explain it. A Ponzi scheme, if we look at that function here, means that the value is cash coming out. But the cash can only come out if more and more people invest in this. A Ponzi scheme doesn't have anything other in utility. That's key. There's no utility inside. It only lives off more and more people coming in. And that's what a Ponzi scheme is. So as soon as, because the utility is purely people coming in, as soon as people stop coming in, the entire value collapses. And this is why Ponzi schemes always collapse. As soon as the number of people, the money that's coming in is not coming in, it completely collapses. So if we look at Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's only value would be in more people coming in, then it would be a Ponzi scheme. Because as soon as there would be no more people coming in, it would collapse. So we need to ask ourselves a super simple question. What is the utility in Bitcoin? Is it anything different than more people coming in? Can I use Bitcoin for anything else? If I can, it's impossible for it to be a Ponzi scheme, because there obviously only is the question, who recognizes that value? In a Ponzi scheme, the value is money coming out because more people are coming in. And so as soon as this goes away, the value completely disappears. So let's ask ourselves, what is the utility of Bitcoin? It's actually three things. Bitcoin is digital. It's an asset that cannot be censored. There's nothing else. It's as fundamental as it gets. People can talk about that it being a communication network, it's a technology, blah, blah, blah. This is all bullshit. At the end, what Bitcoin is, it's digital, it's an asset that cannot be censored. I don't believe that it can be manipulated. Bitcoin is getting manipulated every single day. There is no physical form of Bitcoin. I also don't believe it's a currency. I don't believe it's a form of payment. It's purely a digital asset that cannot be censored. And now comes the important part. That's the utility function. Bitcoin's definition of rarity is mathematically proven, right? So this one here is super simple. Actually, quite interesting if you look at fiat, for example, right? Most people call fiat a Ponzi scheme. Absolutely bullshit. It just shows how people have no clue either what a Ponzi scheme is or how to explain it. The value of fiat is quite clear. The utility is super strong, actually. And I'm going to show you why fiat's value is just very relatively low or going lower. But the utility is super strong. The unit of account, so to measure something in fiat, very, very strong. The second thing, to use it as a medium of exchange, it's super fast because it's centralized. The value is super stable over short terms, but over long term, it keeps getting more and more and more and more because the governments print it. So even though it affects billions of people, the utility is super strong. The problem here is it's not scarce, right? That's why the value keeps diminishing. But very important, there is no way that fiat or Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme because there is utility. And the utility goes way beyond of just more people coming in. Now here's the important part. The utility in Bitcoin, it being digital, there are times when digital is a downside. During a war, digital may be better, may not be better. If there's an electricity outage, digital may be better, may not be better, right? Just super important to understand this. Physical gold may be super good if there's an electricity outage. If there's nothing you can switch on for days, right? Just imagine this. Obviously, in this very form, Bitcoin is useless because you can't even access it because there's no electricity. During these times, it doesn't mean that Bitcoin disappears. It just means during these times. During these times, something physical, super important. Maybe even a weapon during the times of war, way more utility than Bitcoin, right? Just keep this in mind. Being an asset means you put money into it to store it for later. There's a lot of times when you don't want to store money. There are a lot of times when you actually want to spend money. Right now, why is Bitcoin's price right now going down? Very simple. Because people don't want to invest in something. They want to spend it. COVID is going up. They want to travel. They want to have some fun. They want to get some lifestyle credits. And then there's the question, when is it important that something cannot be censored? Well, this is only relevant if there's actually something that is being censored, right? It's always the same thing. The reason why we don't have much problem with the internet right now is because the internet is not all too much censored. Yeah, there is some, but not enough for it to be relevant. So this utility fluctuates. It depends on the inflation, it depends on the entire government, it depends on censorship that's out there, on the lifestyle that people are in. And that is why it's such an emotional value. Also, the concept when people talk about a company having intrinsic value because it produces cash flow. Well, again, cash flow can also be completely irrelevant. There's a lot of times when cash flow is not what you want. As soon as you have inflation, for example, cash flow is not that relevant. There are other things that may be way more relevant because that cash flow, it gets diminished. And that's why, for example, during times of strong inflation, things like commodities, things like gold go up in value way more. And if people don't believe me, just look at the track record of commodities year to date, 2021. Man, they outperformed literally any company. How is this possible if all these companies are producing so much cash flow and there's so much intrinsic value? There is no intrinsic value. That concept doesn't exist. Value always lies in the eye of the beholder. It depends on the situation. It depends on the personal idea. It depends on what people really need right now. So now let's when we understand that, we can now discuss something. Even if there were no more people added to Bitcoin, the value would still move up or down based on the fluctuating utility. So even if it's the same number of people, if people don't add any extra money, it's purely the acceptance of this utility. Then it completely just depends on, do people care more or less about digital? Do they care more or less about having an asset? And do they care more or less about something that cannot be censored? That's what it comes down to. And the key thing, once again, utility is subjective and situational. There's nothing with the ultimate utility. It's absolutely essential to understand those. And now, obviously, there are a couple of things, and this is what Wallace probably meant here, but just throwing this in doesn't explain it. Obviously, a boomer sees utility completely different than a Gen Z or a millennial. And that is normal. It depends on the education, on the background, on what they are used to. Utility is subjective. But, and now comes the key part, right? Over time, boomers will die out. The concepts, not necessarily the boomer itself, but also the ideas of a boomer, the offline, the non-digital, all these values, they are dying out. And it's a pure fact. So the number of people who see this benefit, the utility, this number of people keeps going up. And that to me is the long-term bet. So someone that says Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme either doesn't understand Bitcoin and or doesn't understand what a Ponzi scheme is, or he or she is just ignorant, is just a hater, just tries to argue. Now, again, here you can see one thing that's very clear. That doesn't mean that Bitcoin is going to go to the moon. It doesn't mean that Bitcoin is going to be worth billions of dollars. It just means it can fluctuate. But it has nothing to do with a Ponzi scheme. It has nothing to do with tulips. I believe because of that fact here that Bitcoin is going to do really well, especially over longer periods of time. But on the other hand, it doesn't mean that it's a guaranteed deal. It doesn't mean that it's going to go to zero. It doesn't mean it's a Ponzi scheme. And this is just really important that you are able to argue on very fundamental levels, that you can explain or reason based on first principles, not based on opinions, not based on emotions. Nothing that I defined here other than obviously my opinion that boomers have a different mindset than Gen Z or millennials. But anything else here is very fundamentally explained. I'm not making any predictions on the long-term value on Bitcoin. I believe it's gonna go up. But that's just based on people believing in the value. But just this very fundamental idea shows that Bitcoin is definitely not a Ponzi scheme. Just like the fiat system is not a Ponzi scheme. It has utility. The problem is just the scarcity of the fiat system goes is basically going down, and by it going down, the value completely diminishes. And we see this every single day. It's called inflation. And these are the very fundamental things. And so once you're able to explain it this way, and once you understand it in these simple terms, you can actually explain it to other people. And you have way more conviction yourself in understanding why Bitcoin is not a Ponzi scheme. And if you're trying to argue against this, good luck. This is purely based on facts. There's no opinion in that. You can keep your opinion, but you're not basing it on facts. You're basing it either on being a hater, being ignorant, being uninformed. And I hope that kind of works a bit against that. If it does, I hope you get value at this. Leave a like, leave a nice comment. Maybe you had a bit of an aha moment, and maybe you want to share this video. Otherwise, subscribe, click the bell icon, and then I'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Yours truly, Julian. Bye-bye.